Hello, everyone around the world. Welcome to another Sanctuary for All talk on the Sermon on the Mount. My name is Ryan, and I am very blessed and honored to share the Sermon on the Mount with you, piece by piece, going over it line by line, and sharing with you some of the things about it that have just been so inspiring and so inspirational. It's literally the greatest sermon on earth, and to take some time to study it and find for yourself where it applies to you and your life, because we all have individual particular sticking points in our life or areas that may be troublesome. But the entire sermon itself really directs us away from the ways of the world and instead into the way of the kingdom of God and how that applies to us here while we're on earth. And Jesus gives us great examples and direct instructions about how to live in the spirit of God rather than in the spirit of mankind, which is very limited, not very intelligent compared to, of course, the universe around us, the laws of the universe around us, and the world of the spirit, and certainly is laughable compared to the wisdom and knowledge of God. And here Jesus was trying to pass these things on to us. And now it's been a few weeks. I haven't gotten to do one of these in a couple of weeks. We had holiday festivities going on, family stuff, some medical things, health matters. And so and plus too, I've put a lot of time recently into the sermon or the Psalms music project, which has just been a huge blessing to do. So I apologize for taking a little extra time before getting to this portion of the Sermon on the Mount. And this is an exciting section. It's the eye for an eye section. And it's another one that has, over the centuries, been completely misused, and oftentimes on purpose by those who wish to control or subjugate or get people to be passive. And I don't exactly know what in a person's heart would want to mislead others to the exact opposite meaning, oftentimes, of what Jesus was trying to say in the Sermon on the Mount, into their own particular dogma about it. But I can say that all the times that I've seen that particular type of event, it's always been by a system of power seeking to control others and seeking more power for itself and self-righteousness for itself. So what's very important, first of all, though, is that we just take a look at what Jesus said during this section. Now, we can find this section in Matthew chapter 5, verse 38 through 42. And this is a turning point section in the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus moves from correcting misunderstood righteousness to dismantling the human instinct for retaliation. So the text, what it says in these verses is, "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you not to resist an evil person. But whoever slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other cheek to him also. If anyone wants to sue you and take away your tunic, let him have your cloak also. And whoever compels you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Give to him who asks of you, and from him who wants to borrow from you, do not turn away." And of course, once again, that's Matthew chapter 5, verse 38 through 42. And as you can tell, it's very easy, especially in English, to misunderstand what a lot of these words actually mean. It sounds like Jesus is asking us to just take abuse passively and just be a doormat for other people on this earth. But that is not at all what he's actually saying in these verses. We have to put these things into context for the day. So the eye for an eye part, is not actually him rebuking God's law when he says, "But I tell you." So let's take a look at the original law. The original law, we find it in Exodus 21, Leviticus 24, and Deuteronomy 19. And in Exodus, verses 23 through 25, it says, "And if any mischief follow, then thou shalt give life for life, eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burning for burning, wound for wound, stripe for stripe." Sounds very brutal. But this was, of course, in a legal setting. Leviticus 24, 19 through 20 says, "And if a man causes a blemish in his neighbor, and he hath done, so shall it be done to him. Breach for breach, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. As he has caused a blemish in a man, so shall it be done to him again." See, these were laws in a legal sense. And in Deuteronomy 19, verse 21, it says, "And thine eye shall not pity, but life shall go for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot." See, the purpose of the law back then was to limit retaliation, not to encourage revenge. It was to say, it shall go no farther than this. It was to ensure proportional justice and to place judgment in the courts, not in personal hands. So it was a ceiling. It wasn't a command, it was a ceiling. The problem in Jesus' day was that people had turned judicial restraint into personal justification for revenge. They would feel, oh, what your actions harmed my child, so therefore I deserve to harm you. It was used for personal vengeance. And this is something that Jesus directly had to address. And he says that in the "But I say to you." He's not removing justice. He's removing personal vengeance. Because the section is actually about power, dignity, and freedom from retaliation. So let's move on a little bit further. The next section that he talks about is do not resist an evil person. So once again, this is one of those areas where we as human beings look at the word resist and it's like, oh, we're supposed to just let an evil person do whatever they want to with us. How are we supposed to handle that? I guess we just do not resist an evil person. But we got to look at the words this was written in, which was Greek. And the Greek word for resist, I think it's antisthenia. But, of course, Greek is a very fixed language. It's a very specific word, and it has a very specific definition. So the actual definition of the word resist used here is to violently oppose or to retaliate in kind, to strike back in a mirrored way. So Jesus is not saying at all to endure abuse without boundaries or to submit to violence or to allow injustice to flourish. He's saying, do not let evil define your response. Do not become what wronged you, and do not mirror the oppressor's spirit. A key clarification of this, the line cannot mean never oppose evil, because Jesus himself opposed evil constantly. He confronted abusers. He rebuked hypocrisy. He exposed lies. He drove out exploiters. And he warns us about wolves. So any reading that turns Jesus into someone who forbids opposition to evil contradicts his own life, and contradicts Jesus' life. That's not what he's saying. He's saying, do not be as they are. Do not respond in kind. If somebody hits you, don't just hit them back. He wants to direct us into a different way of understanding and to seeing these things. But none of it is to say there isn't anything that you can do. Matter of fact, what he goes on to is the third option that they had not heard of before. So what Jesus is actually forbidding very specifically in the do not resist an evil person is he's forbidding revenge or tit-for-tat escalation of a matter, or mirrored violence, or humiliation returned for humiliation, or force returned for force. He's not forbidding truth or confrontation or withdrawal or justice or consequences or refusal or exposing of wrongdoings. And this is a very essential distinction in order to understand the rest of this whole section. If do not resist an evil person meant passivity here, then why does Jesus immediately give us active responses? And we can't really get around, he says do not resist and then gives us active responses. So we have to, once again, go back to the original Greek word and figure out what it is that he's actually saying. And like I said, that word has an entirely different meaning. It means basically don't do the same as they do. So he doesn't forbid resisting evil. He forbids becoming evil in the act of resistance. And why this matters so much is misreading this line is how abuse gets spiritualized. It is exactly how boundaries get demonized, how exploitation gets protected, silence gets confused with holiness, and passivity gets mistaken for righteousness. And Jesus never taught any of those things. One of the examples is his very next line about the right cheek. And I will just reread that again. So he says, I tell you, do not resist an evil person. Do not be as them. But whoever slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other to him also. So here again, it's very easy for us to think that he's saying, just let them hit you again. Just take it again. Take the abuse. That's not what he's saying. Whoever slaps you on your right cheek, this is not an incidental detail at the time. In the ancient Mediterranean world, the right hand was used for public interactions. The left hand was associated with unclean tasks. So striking somebody on the right cheek with the right hand requires a backhanded slap. This was not a fighting blow, it was a status insult. In cultural meaning, a backhanded slap was used to humiliate an inferior, or to assert dominance, or to shame somebody publicly. This was the slap of a master to a servant, or a Roman at the time to a Jew, or a superior to an inferior. That type of slap says you are beneath me. So turning the other cheek is not a passive submission, because something very interesting happens here. When a victim turns the left cheek, it all changes. To strike the left cheek, the aggressor must either use an open-handed forehand or strike them as an equal. Both were socially unacceptable in that context. And the reason for that is because a forehand strike implied mutual dignity. You do not strike an inferior in that way, and you do not strike an equal publicly without consequences. So turning the other cheek forces a decision on the person who slapped you in the first place. It's saying, will you recognize my humanity, or will you expose your cruelty further? It's nonviolent resistance. It's not surrender. And even if it was a slap on the right cheek with the right hand, or not backhanded, but a slap on the right cheek the other way, by turning the other cheek, you are again exposing the injustice of their action of striking you. And again, they still have a decision to make what it is that they will do. That was very important. The people of the time would have completely understood that, understood the nuances of what that meant. Now, we don't know that today. We don't know that these things had very specific meanings to the customs of the day then. So when somebody backhands you on the right using their left hand, they are saying, you are totally beneath me. You are worthless. And giving them the other cheek to strike, again, it enforces them to have to make a decision to either treat you as an equal or show their abuse, one way or the other. And this is the third option that Jesus is trying to present. He's not saying just let evil happen to you. He's actually saying confront it in a nonviolent way, not reacting the same way by slapping them back, but by exposing the injustice to their behavior in the first place in such a way that they would have to address it. The same is true with the tunic and the cloak. This is to expose injustice. When he says if somebody takes your tunic, give them your cloak too. The tunic is the inner garment. The cloak is the outer garment. Or so when somebody takes your cloak. And it's protected by law. We find that in Exodus 22, verse 26 through 27. Giving both exposes the injustice of the system. It shames the oppressor without striking them, and it says, look at what you're taking from me. Here's what it says again in Matthew 5, verse 40. If anyone wants to sue you and take away your tunic, let him have your cloak also. So suing is a legal term. He was talking about a court case. It's a courtroom language to sue somebody. Clothing was a major asset for the poor. And in Israel's law, a cloak used as a pledge had special protection. If taken, it had to be returned by sundown because it might be the person's only covering at night. Oftentimes people, they'd sleep with it. It would become like a tent. It would cover them. It would be their blanket. So the law forced them, if they gave up their garment as a surety for a court case, it had to be returned to them at night, so that they didn't suffer and freeze to death, or possibly die because of the elements. So what Jesus is really doing here is interesting. He's describing a situation where the system can strip a person, and he's teaching a response that exposes the injustice, refuses to be driven by, and refuses to be that refuses to be driven by fear or vengeance. What he's saying here is, when your rights are threatened, Jesus shows you a way to respond that unmasks greed without becoming greedy back. And how does this work? This is what I'm trying to get to here. The verb to sue places this in a legal proceedings, not random theft. Right? It's not somebody taking something and so you just offer them everything else. He's talking about a very specific legal scenario, because the courts were very unjust back then. And so he's going to say, here's a way to expose even the injustice of the court. So the person who's taking their garment is already using the court system. They're already using the legal system. And the system then favored the one with power. A poor person's last protections are being stripped away because they're giving them their clothing. And so Jesus chose a scenario where the law technically allows the suit, but the outcome is morally obscene, and this really matters. In Torah law, the cloak was untouchable overnight, as we said earlier. So if you take your neighbor's cloak as a pledge, you shall return it to him before the sun goes down, and that's what's in Exodus 22. Because it doubled his bedding, taking it threatened their survival, and God explicitly defends the poor here. So when a poor person is being taken to court, all they can really give them is their cloak, right? Or their tunic. So when Jesus says, give me your cloak also, he's not saying let them crush you. He is saying let their injustice be seen. And why is this? To give them their cloak and tunic, well, then you're naked. And we have to look at the period then in terms of this idea too. This is something that today we read and we miss, because we see nakedness a lot different than they did then. We have to once again go back to the time then. So nakedness was not the shame that we think it is today. In Jewish culture, the shame of nakedness fell on the viewer, not the one who was naked, especially in public and especially in legal or religious spaces. And that's very crucial. And we can see that elsewhere, like Noah's sons. The shame is on the one who looks at Noah's nakedness. Isaiah's prophetic sign acts and Ezekiel's enacted judgments. Nakedness is a prophetic exposure, not self-humiliation. So to go into the courtroom because somebody with power and money is suing somebody with very little in an unjust way, and to show up there naked, and they have all your garments, you have exposed the injustice of what's going on. So again, Jesus is teaching us there is another way to go about this, where you can still confront it, you can still address it, without having to be violent, without having to act like they do, without having to be as they are. By giving both garments, the poor man stands exposed in court, and the message becomes unmistakable. Look at what your system has done to me. Look at what you are willing to take from me. Look at the righteousness you claim. The aggressor is now publicly revealed, morally naked, and standing in the light of their own cruelty. And that's not a weakness. This is a truth without violence. So, and that, it's very interesting how we have gotten off track throughout history when it comes to things like nakedness. Today, we look upon somebody who's naked or somebody who's scantily clad and we judge them. Oh, well, they must be a floozy, or they must, some name that we give to somebody who's licentious and an adulteress, or, a fornicator, or all that other kind. We look upon them with shame. And we have gotten off track at how we're supposed to look at somebody in their nakedness, or somebody, and even when they're spiritually, emotionally naked before us, when they're even spiritually naked, like people standing on street corners. We have no idea what kind of life they actually have. We have no idea the responsibilities that they actually have. We have no idea why we may see somebody naked in the streets. It could be running from somebody. They just escaped something. And our way of seeing things today, looking upon them as that's shameful and they need to be covered up, or look at what that person's doing, or why do women dress that way? Don't they know they're just enticing men? The shame is on those who are enticed by it. Because we're supposed to look at others who are physically, emotionally, intellectually, spiritually naked before us with compassion and understanding and acceptance. Because we have no idea what they're actually going through or why. We don't have the wisdom or knowledge to actually judge, even when we see these things happen right before our very eyes. And that is what Jesus is trying to get to through all of this. Not that we be oppressed, not that we take violence, but we have to stop seeking vengeance and stop seeking judgment of others. This whole thing is about stop responding to evil with evil. And that's probably very specifically why he said, go naked before the courts. For us today to have to again address that. Like, why? Wouldn't that be shameful? It'd be shameful for those who look upon their nakedness. And so when we look upon somebody and judge them for how they're dressed, or whether they have, how they look, how they wear their hair, how they do anything, when we judge that person, we ourselves have completely stepped outside of everything Jesus Christ has actually taught us. We are the ones then who are more naked before God. We are the ones with the least understanding. He gets to that with the whole beam in your eye and stuff, and we'll get to that later. But that's the point to these things. Once again, it's guiding us into the area where we stop playing God. We stop relying on all these rules and laws that don't work because we turn them into our own personal mechanism to abuse, control, manipulate, protect, get our way, protect what's ours, promote our children and family against others, to get past the greed and the violence of the spirit of the flesh. Jesus here is using the language of Hebrew prophetic syntax. He's dramatized truth, it's enacted critique, moral shock, and it's the same logic as Nathan telling David a story, or Jeremiah wearing a yoke, or Ezekiel lying on his side. The oppressed person regains agency by refusing to play the silent victim. And this would have been electrifying. Jesus' listeners would not think, what a poor, pathetic man. They would think the lawsuit just became a public indictment. This flips the power dynamic. The system then is what's on trial. The oppressor is exposed, and the poor man speaks without speaking because they're just standing there naked. There's so much to all of that. It would take forever to really get into it, and that's the whole point and reason why it's so good to reread and continually study the Sermon on the Mount all throughout our life, because even as we change and we grow and we even just as human beings mature, we gain more understanding of what these words mean to our particular lives and the things in our particular lives. But I have I kind of went off on that whole section because I have seen so many people shame others based on the condition of them being poor or them not having quality clothes or them, living in a lifestyle they don't approve of and how they dress and how they look and how they act and they have all this judgment against them. And back in those days, they still had the understanding that the shame is on the one who's looking and judging, not on the one who's naked. And we have to apply that across the board, especially spiritually, because the spiritual world, God's kingdom, is what is eternal and forever. This world, this human physical thing, passes away. Therefore, it's the lesser reality. The greater reality, then, is what is the spiritual principle here that we need to accept. And that's it. To stop looking at upon another's nakedness and thinking shame on them, it's the shame on us. See, another way he's exposing the system here is in the whole next section about, whoever asked you to go a mile with them, go a second mile. This was very specifically about a thing going on then, but it was, Jesus is using examples of life then to expose them to a third option, to a different way, guiding them out of, the ways of man into the ways of God. So back then, Roman soldiers could legally force a civilian to carry gear 1 mile, no greater than that. And that was often done because, once again, it was abuse of power. They were a soldier and they were better, so therefore you have to carry their, because Jews were looked at as second class or third class citizens by the Romans. And so what Jesus is offering here is a way for us to reclaim our own agency, to remove the soldier's power to command. It transforms coercion into voluntary action. And that's a spiritual defense, once again, without violence. Oh, well, I will carry it for you for 2. And, a Roman soldier could get in serious trouble for that because by law, he could only make you carry it 1. So if you carry it 2, now they're worried, right? It has flipped the coin. Instead of them laughing and mocking what they have done to you, now they're scared about what's going to happen to them, and they're not scared of you because of it. Now they're going, no, 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 go ahead, let me take it back. They don't want you to go the second mile because you have exposed the oppression of somebody asking you to do something that they should be doing for themselves. That line, in case you've forgotten, says, and whoever compels you, meaning forces you, to go 1 mile, go with him 2. They compel you emotionally, they compel you physically, they compel you logically, they compel you spiritually. Compel is a very important word there. It relates to the practice of forced requisition. Authorities could compel locals to carry loads and serve as porters or guides. And this isn't a hypothetical thing back then. And Matthew even used the same concept later when Simon of Cyrene is compelled to carry Jesus' cross. So what Jesus is really saying here is when the empire flexes on you, you can respond in a way that keeps your agency. You are not only acted upon, you can choose a response that breaks the humiliation cycle. So I'm going to make you do this. Hey, I'd be happy to do it for you. You know what? I will go 2 miles. Let me walk beside you. Jesus is trying to empower you here, taking a moment where you were being flat out treated as lesser, and you have now taken the power and said, no, I will do it. I'll go twice as long. You're only allowed to do it to me to this far. I have the power to do it further. That's the third option. It isn't resisting. It isn't arguing with the soldier. It isn't telling them how they're wrong. It's just exposing it by your act of reclaiming your own integrity and the integrity of God. That's the empowerment Jesus is trying to give you here. And to say this, it fits the whole pattern of Jewish resistance. Jesus' teaching aligns with the broader Jewish resistance ethic that avoided armed revolt while refusing humiliation. Um, like the cloak, taking someone's cloak overnight being illegal, giving both garments publicly expose that injustice. The second mile, Roman law allowed forced labor, and going to remove the soldier's power and put him at risk of discipline. So those two examples refuse retaliation, refuses submission, exposes injustice, and preserves your integrity. And the cheek, exposes humiliation. The cloak exposes exploitation. And the second mile exposes coercion. These are big manipulation tactics in the world at that time and in our world today. We have people shaming other people all the time and coercing them into their way and how they see things and what they believe is right, and abusing their power to force you to conform, otherwise you will be punished. And Jesus was saying, God's wisdom will show you another way to where you can expose it without playing their game at all and maintaining your own personal integrity and the integrity that he wished to give you. The next section, likewise, Matthew 5, verse 42. Give to him who asks of you, and from him who wants to borrow from you, do not turn away. The community meaning back then. In a world without modern safety nets, this was it was a covenant community generosity, especially towards the vulnerable. So it flows naturally from the earlier line about not treating the poor like prey. The cloak is pledge laws, sit in that same ethical stream there. What Jesus is trying to say here is let your life be so free from retaliation and fear that you can live open-handed. He's not asking you to enable harm or fund evil. He's talking about the people who are poor, people who are actually needy, people who need help, need support. Maybe they just need someone to talk to them. Maybe they just need somebody to understand them or to listen to them. Maybe they need a couple dollars for an actual meal. Jesus isn't asking us to become a resource for predators in this. It's all about someone who actually is needy. Because there are people who seek out givers intentionally, who mock those who help them, who weaponize victim language and blame others for their own refusal to grow. And that's not the situation Jesus is addressing in Matthew 5. He's confronting oppression, humiliation, coercive power, and systemic exploitation. Since that's all part of the same section, we have to understand that that's what he's addressing here. So he's not enabling immaturity. He's not endorsing that we enable immaturity or that we fund irresponsibility or that we reward contempt for goodness. And that, one of the things that we can ask ourselves is, are my actions of helping someone, does it help them stand, or is it helping them stay down? Is my generosity, does it strengthen irresponsibility? Does it feed contempt? Does it remove accountability? Because if it does, it's no longer generosity. It's misplaced compassion. And Scripture warns us about that also. And one of the reasons why this is important is because many people, especially even by churches, have been spiritually bullied by these verses. They've been drained dry and told it was holiness, and are carrying guilt for finally saying enough. They feel bad. This is not at all what Jesus is saying in any of these. This entire section is almost the opposite. Of course, like I said, he's not telling us to confront evil with evil. He's showing us how we can expose it without being evil. He's not telling us to turn the cheek so that we get beat up or to give somebody everything we have if they're suing us, so that we just have nothing and we're just a victim and look at how bad we are. And he's not saying help other people to your own demise or help those who are manipulating you or taking advantage of you or lying to you or stealing from you. because this whole section is about when you're being coerced, when you're being pressured, when you're being forced, when you're being oppressed. This is how you handle it. Don't handle it as they do. Don't be match evil for evil. And we can always apply the fruit test to this whole thing about helping others. Um, when Jesus said, you will know them by their fruits, we can know the fruits of these actions also. Um, does our helping enable exploitation? Does it protect deception? Is there refusal to repent? Is there moral stagnation? Does this cause false victimhood? Is there guilt-based control as a result? Is there a suppression of truth? Are we hiding? Because in this entire section, what Jesus is doing, he's confronting exploiters. He's calling for repentance. He exposes hypocrisy. He warns about wolves. He withdraws from manipulators. And he refuses false peace. A lot of us think, well, God told me to just give everything I had, so that's what I do. And then there are those who do that to look righteous. The whole system has gotten twisted. The reason why there are problems in every single one of those areas is because there's layers of manipulation in every single one of those areas. But the point is once again, this puts the power in your hands. Jesus is saying if somebody asks of you, you get to decide whether you help. He's saying help in any way you can. Do whatever you can. He's not saying help lies, help manipulation, help being a victim. He's not telling you to let yourself be a victim. All these passages are how you no longer have to be a victim. You can actually take control of a situation, if you want to use that word, back from somebody trying to oppress you. And he's trying to remind us throughout all this entire section of passages that justice here belongs actually to God, that vengeance enslaves our soul, and that freedom comes through refusing retaliation. And, Paul later echoed that in Romans 12 when he said, "Do not avenge yourselves, for it is written, 'Vengeance is mine, I will repay,' says the Lord." And, what most of us expect when we hear these sections is, and even Jesus' listeners back then, they would have expected to hear, "Don't hit back," and which was the weakness. Or they would have expected to hear, "Fight back," which is rebellion. But Jesus offered that third way. He offered courage without violence, resistance without corruption, and strength without domination. And that's precisely why Rome found him dangerous. He was a single person, but an entire zealots found him very frustrating, and the poor found him liberating because he was empowering the poor. He was empowering the poor in spirit, the poor in knowledge, the poor in intellect, the poor in emotional stability, and the poor in spirituality. These passages have often been misused to silence victims, and this is not the intent at all of Jesus here. He's not commanding the endurance of abuse or staying in violent situations or telling us to submit to exploitation. He's literally addressing insult, oppression, power imbalance, and public humiliation. And he's restoring agency to us. He's not removing it. He's actually restoring it. And we in modern times, we kind of miss this point. We see this whole section as Jesus telling us to just be passive doormats. But what those ancient listeners would have heard, because they understood the context of each one of these sections because it was part of their daily life, they would have heard that Jesus was teaching them how to stand without becoming like their oppressors. And that distinction changed everything. And it still applies today. We have online retaliations, we have relational wounds, we have church conflicts, we have family disputes, we have cultural outrage cycles. And it's very easy for us to get ourselves involved in that and lower and debase ourselves and become violent, aggressive, shameful, hateful creatures ourselves, thinking that we are addressing a violent, aggressive abuse of power. But if we use violence and aggression and abusive curses and stuff, we have lowered ourselves to their level. We have made ourselves equal to them. The only way to not justify their behavior is to stand above that. And we do that with God's power because our human reaction is to retaliate. Our human reaction is to get in their face and confront them and tell them, what they have done is wrong. Of course it would. But we have become like them because they justify their actions in the first place by saying those people are wrong because they're not like us. They didn't do what I did. I have the authority to do what I did, and they're beneath me. And they're actually lower than the people that they are attacking because they have lowered themselves to a place of violence, coercion. They're using power to control the lives of others. They don't have authority over the lives of others. They have power over the lives of others because of strength, resources, money, whatever the case may be. But they don't literally have any authority over another. Only God has authority over the lives of other people, over the lives of human lives. And you have authority over your own life. And that's what Jesus is trying to give us here today. And this leads us into the whole next section about loving your enemies. And it's a required setup for that, so that we understand that once again, when we get into that section, he's not telling us to be victims of our enemies. He's trying to help us see it from a spiritual and godly perspective, to see it differently, to literally live in a different world and stand in a world where we understand with wisdom and God's righteousness what it is taking place in front of us and what it actually means. But never in these passages was he saying, just be a victim, just let him take everything. What does it matter? It matters to our everyday life. Even Jewish law recognized that a person required their clothing, otherwise, they could suffer greater consequences than whatever the lawsuit was they were up against. So if man can understand that, we have to try and see that Jesus is trying to give us the next level of this, something beyond our understanding. So we have to ask God, what do these things mean? And that means first we had to go back to what they meant to them then, so that we understand what Jesus was trying to say to us even today. Now, if he was here giving this sermon now, he would use different examples. He would use examples that are fitting for today. Like maybe he would use online bullying. Maybe he would use something going on in certain agencies across the world. The power and control of certain wealthy people or systems, who knows? But he used things that they understood then, what they actually meant. And we have to understand that in order to understand these passages, because they appear right on the outset like he's saying, just lay down and die, let them kick you to death. And he's not. He's trying to empower us to a higher standard, to a greater power that we ourselves feel the dignity of. And like the thing with the Roman soldiers, go the extra mile. That was a direct comment on those events taking place at that time. This is one of those sections that it's been very difficult to watch certain people suffer with thinking they have to accept abuse. because Jesus is showing us how to expose the abuse, maintain our dignity. And he's giving us direct actions to do, which means it's not about being passive. Passivity means you do nothing. You just stand there and take it. He's not saying stand there and take it. He's giving us direct things to actually do. And so each and every single one of us are going to have to take a look into our worlds today and take a look at where there is maybe injustice around us and examine and inventory our own life. Are we retaliating violence to violence, tooth for tooth, eye for eye? Are we seeking vengeance instead of justice? Because if we are, we're still living in the world of flesh. And of course, we're going to feel it. We're going to feel like we want vengeance. We're going to feel like, but we don't have to live in that. We have a choice. We have the power of choice. That's the one power God gave us to choose between life and death. We're still going to feel the pain. We're still going to feel the anger. But now what are we going to do about it? We can make a choice. Am I going to, let this Roman soldier oppress me? Or am I going to say, no, I will go twice as far as you're even allowed to put on me? And of course, these are not, yeah, people were physically doing stuff like that, but that's not the point. The point is to understand the principle. So we don't have to actually go to, the extra mile. We will want to. We will be of a spirit where it's okay, where we understand what's going on with the person who is so lacks so much power, they have to try to exert power over others. Only a lack of power seeks power. God is all power. And when we have God's power in us in a situation, there is no power we seek. We do not wish to overpower anybody or put anybody in their place or look at somebody who's naked in judgment. Instead, we understand what it is and we see, this person's laughter and humiliation of trying to do to us is to hide their own. Because somebody who is secure in themselves, somebody who feels good about themselves, oppresses no one. Nor do they have to make anybody lower than themselves, nor do they have to treat anybody lower than themselves. When we treat somebody lower, like they're beneath us, it's because we are hiding our own defect and our own lack of power and our own fears. This is what Jesus is trying to show us. And by saying, if you understand these principles and you're willing to be of this spirit, first of all, you will maintain your dignity. But second of all, you will see yourself clearly also. You will see where you have fallen down. And you have been like an animal just responding to things rather than actually applying your God-given choice to choose life or death. You have been stuck in darkness and continually choosing death over and over and over again, thinking it's the right thing to do. That's what I love about the Sermon on the Mount. It never stops revealing more and more as time goes on to every single one of us who want to read it and want to understand. God constantly teaches us more. It's brilliant. It's a wisdom beyond what the human eye can actually see at first glance, and even after many years sometimes of study. It takes direct experience. It takes practice. It takes a desire and willingness to try these things, to confront ourselves and say, okay, I'm going to stop looking at the girl at church who wears short skirts like something's wrong with her. And I'm going to realize something's wrong with me that I keep looking at her, that she shouldn't be dressed that way. And why is she showing her legs? I'm the one who's got an issue with her legs, right? Jesus is trying to wake us up. And it just gets even deeper and richer as we get into the next sections. But this section here is very important to understand. We are not being told to take abuse. That was not at all what these suggestions were about. And, helping others that's why he ended it with that. Because under the context of, you don't give everything you have to those who are stealing from you. When somebody is truly in need, though, be of spirit. I'm right here. What can I do for you? How can I help? Because all resources and all things are God's, not ours in the first place. What is ours is the right to choose between life or death and to experience the path of either one to help us continually make that choice. Because I may have chosen the path of life when it comes to my marriage, but I haven't chosen the path of life when it comes to my job, right? Or my friendships. So we all have areas of our own life where we may still have sticking points, but that's why it's okay to take a look at our own selves and say, hey, here's where I'm falling down. Maybe we need to talk to a friend about it. Maybe we need to talk to our pastor about it and say, I still have, you know, I still want to attack these people for harming me or harming others. With prayer and guidance from God, He will always show us that third option that we cannot see while we're in our own will and our own feelings. So, this whole section is about developing the desire, again, to follow God and to trust God, even when our first reactions, which are natural to our flesh, are completely contrary. To say, I'm willing to pause with this and allow God to show me another way. And Jesus used a few examples that were relative to that time to show them that about the cloak, about the cheeks, uh, about the miles, and about helping others. Because so many were needy then, and they would be ignored. They would be looked at as though, well, they're not doing enough. And and then others would exploit that. Today we have even religious systems that exploit these very words in these paragraphs, in these verses, to get people to give everything they have to them. That is why it's important we understand this was actually about anti-exploitation. The right to choose and the right to decide is in your hand. If you don't authentically, of your own volition and your own will, choose and decide what you want to how you want to address the matters in your own personal life. If you're just doing it because somebody else told you this is how, or another person coerced you into obeying, otherwise you'll go through punishment or judgment or curses. We've given up the very thing Christ is trying to give us, because it's our God-given right to choose. So God wants you to have the right to choose how you handle every single one of the situations in your life without the coercion of others, without the coercion of even your church. Because if it isn't authentic, it's fake and false, and it isn't real in the first place. But when it's authentic, when it is your choice, when you say, I can't take this anymore, or I can't do that anymore, or whatever, even if it's a thing in your life that's a failure on your part, you're still acknowledging the truth. And there's nothing that can be done that to repair the areas of our life that are busted up or need guidance if we're not even willing to admit to ourselves that those areas are busted up and need guidance. It's a whole nother section where Jesus is not telling us how we should see others and how others should be and how the world should be. He's addressing how the world is and what we can do about it. So we don't react in kind We don't, that's why he started with don't resist an evil person. Don't be as them. Because all these things he counts as evil. So he's giving us a different option on how we respond to evil. And we don't have to respond to evil with evil. We can respond to evil with God's power and with the right to choose and the ability to make that choice authentically and in the grace and understanding and power of God's kingdom stand with us. All we have to do is be willing and to continually seek and continually follow God and continually desire to want to know more. And God will reveal more always to anyone who wants to know. And anyone who wants to know God, God will reveal himself to. Those who pretend they want to know God, God doesn't reveal himself to. Those that do so that others think they're righteous, God doesn't reveal himself to them. But to anyone who is by themselves, saying, I don't know what to do. I'm so angry with these things. I'm so angry with that. There's so much injustice in the world. God, how would you have me understand and deal with these things? God will answer that for you. Not all at once, because every single day there will be more to learn. But it will be answered because God is seeking those who are truly seeking him. And he's ready and waiting for all of us. And whenever we're ready, he's there. Well, all right. I love all you guys. I look forward to the next section on the Sermon on the Mount. I hope this was helpful. And I look forward to doing more of the Psalms Music Project. And thank you so much for your time and listening to all this. And I will talk to you soon.